So welcome everyone. For those of you that don't know me, although I think I know everyone here, my name is Judy Black. I'm president of the RASC Halifax Center. Welcome to the first of our meetings, Zoom meetings for 2022. Hope everyone had a good holiday despite all circumstances that have happened since. I'm going to share my screen with you. So again, welcome. You can certainly reach our center through our website at halifax.rasc.ca. We also have our YouTube channel, which you can access and access all our previous meetings as well. But in a couple of days, you'll be able to see this one if for any reason you have to leave or would like to review any portion thereof. If you have any questions or concerns that you would like raised at one of the meetings or by our board, you can contact me at president@halifax.rasc.ca. And in case you can't write fast enough, this information is certainly on our website that you can access there very readily. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Maliseet peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. I'd also like to welcome everyone from near and far, and to understand that the RASC and the RASC Halifax Center believe in and practice inclusivity and diversity. All are welcomed regardless of age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, ethnic origin, color, nationality, national origin, religion or belief, or sex or sexual orientation. We are opposed to all forms of unlawful and unfair discrimination. Certainly, we'd like to encourage people that aren't currently members to become members. There are lots of perks. When you join RASC from the national office, you get a copy of the Observer's Handbook, and we'll get into that later. I know there are some challenges right now, but certainly that is part of your membership. The Explore the Universe Guide, issues of Sky News, Journal of the RASC, both print and electronic versions. The RASC Bulletin comes out on a regular basis, as well as the RASC Newsletter, which are both e-newsletters. And certainly you get archive center newsletters, both ours as well as others if so interested. You also have access to the RASC Awards, the observing programs that are offered by them, special presentations, publications, the Observer's Calendar, which is, well, it's January now, and certainly copies of John Reed's books, one of our members who has written several books on different aspects of astronomy. Excuse me. You have access to the discussion list or forum on various subjects, and you get deals on home and auto insurance, as well as liability insurance on RASC activities. By joining and becoming affiliated with our center, you have access to our own newsletter, Nova Notes, to our discussion list and announce list, as well as our center resources, such as our library and the St. Croix Observatory. But most importantly, regardless of whether it's national or here at the center, there's this incredible group of astronomers and mentors, both professional and amateur, the new and experienced, as well as astrophotographers and sketchers alike. So please join us. After all, astronomical camaraderie awaits you. Our agenda today is, well, the welcome we've already completed. In a moment, I will pass the torch over to Paul Gray, who will provide our photo montage. We have two guest speakers today. Blair MacDonald will address pandemic astrophotography. You know, what do you do when you're stuck at home? I think that's basically what it's about. And Chris Young with his sky lore of the Pleiades, long observed everywhere. Then David Hoskin, our newly appointed observing chair, will provide the What's Up in January Skies. Then I'll provide the news from the board. At which point we would stop recording, and members are welcome to remain online for our Astro Chat. It's a very informal piece where we can toss anything and everything around for discussion. I'm going to stop share, and I will pass it over to Paul Gray. If you would, Paul.
Hey, Judy, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's been a while. I've been away for several meetings, so I've got a bit of a backlog here. I'm going to try and remember how to do all this. All right, I'm just gonna let it roll. I think there's 55 or 60 images this month because, as I said, I haven't done this since summertime, so I might not have everyone's, but I have everything I could find in my email meetings folder from the past 5 months. So I'm not going to say a whole lot about them. I'm just going to kind of let it roll through, and let people have a gander. It's been an active summer, fall. I think everyone who's on the email list sees the pictures coming through quite often. And those who are on the Facebook group see a number of stuff being posted there as well. So it's been a wide range of imaging, everything from the moon and Venus conjunctions to deep sky to comets to, and I don't think I have any comet pictures in here actually. I don't think I got any of those last ones in December, unfortunately. So I'll dig for those and find those for the next time.
That's very nice.
There's a lot of great stuff this month or this fall by a lot of different people. It's been amazing to see what's been coming in.
That one's in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, actually, I believe.
I believe that's where you and Jerry were at the time. Yep.
Yeah.
M33 is that?
Yep.
That's nice, Paul.
That was actually before I modified the DSLR. So I now have a modified camera, and I was intending to go back and do a comparison shot, but the weather just wasn't there this fall for me.
Oh.
Mike Bosch is doing his amazing stuff through Windows again. just blows me away what he can do through glass planes. I believe that was Dark Sky Weekend, if I'm correct, Jerry and Judy.
Yep, you are correct.
For those lucky folks who got to be there for it. This was actually after I modified the DSLR, so I'm quite happy with how things turned out.
How did you modify it?
I took the UV IR filter completely out and went with the naked sensor. Tedious task. It was a little bit nerve-wracking at times, but hopefully we'll get some clear skies that I can really put it through.
You can do it yourself, but I had a professional do it because that was just too scary for me.
Yeah, I managed to find a secondhand used T3 on the local market for $100, so I figured I'm not out much if I screw it up.
That's the one I had modified as well. Works well.
Yeah. And I picked up a new little ZWO camera that I've been trying to learn how to process planetary images. A long way to go. Charles White and Mike Gatto have both been doing amazing sketches as well this fall. There's a couple of those thrown in here.
Paul, if you're going to start doing planetary images, download yourself a copy of Images Plus. It has a couple of functions that produce some awesome planetary shots.
I have it.
Excellent.
What a shot, David.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's great work there.
Well,
yeah.
Well,
I'm
these
waiting for the sun to get higher now before I can start doing imaging again.
Yeah.
While these are going through, Paul, I'm going to totally steal Dave's thunder with his "What's Up" talk and just say cloud.
Yep.
Well, tonight will be good until about midnight.
I haven't looked. Last time I looked, it said it was good after midnight.
Oh, okay.
Till about 2 o'clock.
I don't know. There's still some really high cloud down here in the valley, so I don't think it's going to clear completely.
Yeah, I got to get about another 4 hours on a target.
Watch out for the wind.
I gotta get the foot and a half of snow off the observatory roof first.
I am not giving you any sympathy. I'm sorry.
Hey, we got a lot of snow and it was heavy.
No, it was the observatory comment.
Oh, okay. Still, there's lots of snow on it.
Wow.
That's nice, David.
Oh, that was.
Yeah, that was
great.
Dark Sky Weekend
That is something.
with the Red Cat on a Star Venture Pro mount.
Wow.
So that's what you were doing at the back when we were there?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
Great the way you brought out the blue.
Mm.
That's a good one too, Paul.
Wow. Just look at that.
I want to take that picture, Paul. That's
What, the Stephens Quintet?
Yeah.
yes.
I'm happy with that.
So how did you get so close to the ISS, David?
manual tracking of it with a 12-inch Dob.
Ouch.
Actually, he held his breath.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You'd have to. Yeah.
That's really 100mm lens shot.
Well, David, you seem to be covering everything that's possible with astro imaging here. You got the sun, you got the moon, you got the ISS, so you got everything.
yeah, I'm dabbling.
The man doesn't sleep.
My next hobby project is to build a radio telescope.
What, a 23-meter one?
No. Just,
Now, not only will he not sleep, but he can take pictures in clouds.
exactly.
Wow.
David, I might have a book here or two for you about radio astronomy if you're interested.
Oh, that would be, thanks.
Maybe we should make a center project.
Oh, that's from Site 15 at Kedge. Neat.
Ah, there is a comment in the slide set this month. I know I had one in there.
Hmm.
Not the impressive one we've all been hoping for, that they're getting down south, but
No,
that's a nice shot.
Yeah, that is glorious.
That's
Pretty cool too. Well, I like having that out at the York Redoubt with the cannon.
Hmm.
Pretty neat shot, David. You should send me that for consideration in the calendar. I'm not the editor anymore, but Chris Beckett's letting me still work on the photos.
Hard to believe those are sketches, isn't it?
I know, that man is
Amazing.
amazing. Not to mention what he sees. I don't know if Michael's here today or not, but he does amazing work.
Hmm. That was
Dude,
with my
you-
iPhone.
With your iPhone?
Yeah.
Handheld. Wow. That's a gorgeous shot too, Judy.
That was, yeah. And again, that was with an iPhone.
Yeah, you should send me that as well.
It's not the equipment, it's the art of seeing.
Yeah, whole lot of factors come together.
Yeah. Neat.
An interesting note is I think over half of the photos are taken by a David of some sort. Between David Chapman and David Hoskins, the guys are quite busy.
What telescope do you use for that, Dave?
The Lunt 40mm that I have.
You call me up on a Saturday night, and I hear a sweet voice. Boy, you say my name just right. Give me a t-shirt.
I don't know who isn't muted, but could you mute your music, please? Wow.
David, what do you do with all these photographs? Are they lost forever once we see them here?
Pretty much. I put them on Facebook and Twitter and archive them.
One thing that works really well for that stuff, David, is one of those electronic picture frames.
Oh, good idea.
They make good screensavers on a widescreen TV too.
So I'm not on either of those social media you have there, David. There's no way to access them from some other source?
Don't think so.
Did the RASC Center ever consider putting together a gallery of some sort? We could have like by now 1,000 photographs on it, but would make everyone's work accessible.
There is a spot on the website to submit your photos if you choose to have them there. That nobody has done that in a number of years.
I guess the only archive would be these slideshows that I've saved.
Well, I think it'd be a good idea if we make them more publicly available. For one thing, if you're an aspiring astro imager, the breadth of what we see here today certainly says, wow, you don't need heavy equipment, but you can make good use of it if you want to. And I think that would be really great. And we've got some great photographers here, and I think it'd be good to have a showcase of that.
Tony, there are some issues doing that. You need the photographer's permission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
No, that's a big problem at the moment in some of the national stuff.
I'm not sure how that's a problem if I say, for example, okay, Paul, you can submit my stuff, sort of thing.
Not at all. Just we have to make sure we do that before we put them in any kind of archive.
There's the X for those who want to know where it's at.
It's on the moon.
And the V is there too.
Yeah, the V's up here. There's a close-up of both the V and the X for David Hoskin.
Hmm.
I thought I had one too, but I couldn't find it. I know I shot it. But I think I may have missed it.
I took that with the Costco scope.
Hmm.
Again, that's through a window.
Yeah.
You should see what he does when he can open the window.
I know. Imagine if he was still allowed on the roof.
Yeah.
I was playing with the new camera there back in, I think this was October.
Clavius is an interesting crater. So much
I
going
love it.
on.
One of my favorites,
Yeah.
both visually and for imaging.
So it seems to me, Judy, the RASC Center needs a curator of photographs or images and sketches.
I'll put it on the to-do list. Wow.
Yeah, Michael managed to get some meteors. I mean, I'm assuming he's putting his camera on his up by his window and shooting these out the window, which is even more amazing. You know, like, although this one was some St. Mary's, but Michael goes through all the webcam grabs at Spew. But that was a pretty good meteor. That one, that would have been impressive to see.
Mm.
That's a Venus brightness fireball there. And I think this is the last one. So Jerry, how did the actual picture turn out from the camera that we're seeing in the picture?
I was waiting for actually to be able to see the comet, and it was behind the clouds. So.
Okay. Yeah,
But I did get some good comet pictures earlier, but I guess it didn't make it to the email distribution.
Yeah. Yeah, Tony asked about this picture here. I just wanted to mention this is probably my best picture to date, and this was after I modified the camera. And I think this is about 5 hours worth of exposure on 7331 and Stefan's quintet. But it's honestly, it's the first one I can say I'm completely happy with and done.
Mm.
Anyway, lots of pictures, lots of people. I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, well done, everyone.
So great job, everybody, and I'll continue to gather the emails to a separate inbox as they see. And I assume that anybody who's posting a photo to the email list, RASC Halifax Center email list, is giving permission for us to show them at the center meeting, simply because you're showing them to the center anyway. So, but beyond that, this is as far as they go.
Other than the YouTube, excuse me, recording.
Yeah, the YouTube recording that's for the center, that's right.
But maybe we should make a comment here in that the photographs are the property of the photographers and permission to reuse should be asked from the photographer.
Yeah, I'll have to add that disclaimer at the start of the slideshow and future shows, just so we know that that's there and
Sure.
so on. Be good to do.
Okay, well, thanks so much for that, Paul. Much appreciated. And thanks to everyone who has been sharing their photographs. You've certainly provided a lot of oh wow moments for all of us. Next up on our agenda is our first guest speaker, Blair MacDonald. I'm sure many of you have known Blair for many years, as I have, and know the quality of the photographs that he takes and all his expertise in editing photographs. So Blair has offered to speak today on pandemic astrophotography. So be interested to hear what you have to say, Blair. Take it away.
Okay, let's see if this share will work properly here. Bear with me a minute. So let me know when everyone can see the title slide there.
You're good.
We're good.
Good enough. So basically, this is the third in a series of talks that I had. Just one second, I'm going to turn off video here so that I don't gobble up bandwidth unnecessarily and have anything screw up during the presentation. So this is a third in a series of talks that I've given to the center entitled Astrophotographer Skies. And this one in particular was kind of, shall we say, being hatched in the back of my mind as the pandemic started off. Let's see here now. There we go. And thus the title, Pandemic Astrophotography. The idea behind the talk came to me while we were locked down, and many of us got, shall we say, stuck at home as the only observing site that we had. And just because there's a pandemic and you're in the middle of a lockdown and can't get out to your favorite dark sky site, and I do encourage people when we have these lockdowns, don't drive to your favorite dark sky site. You know, you're only an accident or a breakdown away from potentially infecting or getting infected. You know, having have that on your conscience as well. So it's always good to keep in mind that even during the pandemic, if you're willing to make a few changes to your equipment, potentially, depending upon where you are, and to your techniques, you can capture some pretty good images from even an urban site. I was actually very pleasantly surprised with some of the images I've been able to get here. And coming up in a couple of slides, you'll get some idea of what my imaging site looks like. It's not good. So since it looks like we're in for another round of mobility restrictions, I thought I'd share what I found in testing some of the new gear that I've acquired to take urban images, and some of the techniques I've come up with in the hope that I can save others from making the same mistakes I did, to be quite blunt about it. There are some things that I've learned that really make quite a difference in taking some of these images. So, as you can imagine, our wonderful pandemic does put some limitations on what we can do. So it became very difficult to travel to dark sky sites, at least for a portion of the pandemic. It did open up, as everyone knows, a little later, and we could get out to St. Croix and to our favorite dark sky sites. And I'll tell you, it was wonderful. It was actually nice to see people again. But during lockdowns, urban driveways and backyards tend to become our primary imaging site. My comment to Paul earlier, of course, in jest, was I hate him because he has a nice dark sky observatory in his backyard. Paul, are you willing to take in boarders? And
Sorry, what was that, Blair?
What's that?
What am I willing to do?
Are you willing to take in boarders?
We'll see post-pandemic.
Yeah, fair enough. At any rate, as you can imagine, light pollution, at least in the city, is definitely a limiting factor, but it's not as bad as you may think, and it's certainly not as much of a limiting factor as I had thought when I first started trying this. I will ask one thing. I noticed there's a couple of chat messages that just come through. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, I normally like to make these talks interactive, but Zoom really doesn't support that well. So unless there's a burning question or you see some error in what I've done, hold on to them till the end, and then we'll have a Q&A session and I'll answer everything that I can. So like I said, this is my imaging site, just to give people an idea of the kind of light pollution I'm dealing with. Now, assuming you can see my mouse pointer, this is my house here. Typically, I set my telescope up next to my wife's car here. And as the comment says above this image, this is taken early fall, about 11 p.m. So we are past astronomical twilight here. And that red glow in the north, that is looking due north, that is not sunset, that is Lower Sackville, as seen through my Canon 60DA in about a probably 5 to 10 second exposure. So that'll give you an idea of where I'm shooting. I've got bright street lights, I've got lights on neighboring houses, and I've got light pollution, and lots of it, as you can see from those clouds. Here's the view behind the telescope. So you can see this light here is this light here in this image. There was no light shining on the telescope. That's simply light pollution illuminating the telescope in about a 10-second exposure. So those are the kinds of conditions that some of the urban astrophotographers in the club deal with. And I know, for instance, David Hoskins has an even harder time with his site. I used to live not too far from David. And I can tell you, when you're imaging out over Halifax and the container pier where he's located, it makes for a very challenging astrophotography session, but it can be done. So give everyone an idea of the gear I'm using. This shot was taken, I believe, pre-pandemic. But at any rate, I have two cameras. One is a camera that I've long loved, which is a Canon 60DA. It is a DSLR that's modified, if you will, by Canon. They put in a different IR cut filter, and it has increased red sensitivity. And I absolutely love the camera, even for daytime shots. Sunset pictures in particular are spectacular through it because of the increased red sensitivity. That camera, however, over time, it's about 10 years old now, excuse me, has begun to show its age, and it's developed a little bit of a banding problem, which limits what I can do with it for astrophotography. It does not limit what I can do with it for daytime or even sort of nighttime regular photography shots. But if I'm doing deep sky imaging, it definitely causes some grief. So I've moved on to a dedicated Astrocam now, a Zoo ASI 2600 MC, which is the color version, the one-shot color version of that camera. And absolutely love it. It's got a much more modern sensor than my 60DA, and it has a wonderful noise floor, and you get some really nice images off it, as you'll see in a little bit. The optics, an Esprit 120 APO reflector. It's sort of a middle of the road APO. It's not a Takahashi or an Astrophysics, but it is a very nice scope. To anyone that is thinking of purchasing that particular scope, I will caution you, it has a reputation for pinched optics. And if you're willing to tweak a couple of screws, you can make that pinch go away. And it has spectacular optics and a focuser that is a joy to use. As Jerry can attest, you can practically do chin-ups on the focuser and not have any deflection at all. Jerry also has one. The mount is a Celestron CGX-L. The L has a higher weight carrying capability than the standard CGX. And it replaces my original Celestron CGE Pro. That mount was, I'll just say, heavy and leave it at that. People only helped me carry it into St. Croix once. After that, they learned to never offer it again. The guiding system I'm using is it consists of an Orion Starshoot auto guider. That's the little tiny camera right here. An Orion 80mm guide scope. And although you can't see it, right here is actually a Skywatcher guide scope mount that gives me an awful lot of flexibility in finding guide stars. I've got about 20-degree swing vertically and horizontally there. Although with that guide scope, I really don't need it, but it is quite convenient. I use a tablet computer down here to control the whole system. The combination of the software that is in the Celestron mount and a package that Celestron allows you to download from their website called CPWI. The combination of those two makes the pointing accurate enough that I no longer use any kind of software to recenter my mount. I don't use plate solving at all. It basically puts the target right on the pixels in the center of the camera. So it's a wonderful system that Celestron has cooked up. And finally, the whole thing rides on a scope buggy. This was a Christmas present from my wife a few years ago, and anyone that is doing urban imaging, I can wholeheartedly suggest you get one of these or make one. A lot of people have now made them. You can make them out of plywood, for example. It's really nice to be able to have the whole thing assembled in the garage, and literally from the time I make up my mind to go imaging to snapping my first shot or my first sub-exposure can be around 20 minutes. That includes aligning the telescope. Having it just, able to wheel it out is a godsend. Not quite as nice as being able to roll the roof off the observatory, but then again, I don't have room for an observatory in the backyard, so this was the next best thing. So we'll talk about filters in a few minutes, but before adding a filter to my setup, excuse me, I ended up with a few guidelines that I'd probably like to pass along to folks that are interested in urban imaging. As you can imagine, in the sky, unfiltered, in the city rather, unfiltered, the sky is rather bright. So to get around problems with having the sky saturate your image, you end up using shorter sub-exposures. So typically where I might shoot 5 to 10 minutes from dark skies, I'm shooting a couple of minutes with my DSLR from the city. 3 minutes is usually pushing it here in the city for sub-exposures. The catch is most modern cameras are sky limited as far as noise goes in just a few seconds. So there's lots of leeway here. You don't really have to shoot in the city for 15 minutes to get a picture that's quiet enough. You can generally get away with even 30 seconds if the target is bright enough, and just shoot lots of them. As I said, the shorter subs mean that the total exposure you're going to need to tame the noise can be a little longer than it would be from dark skies. And how much you need to tame that noise through exposure is really a function of how good your noise reduction is in image processing. So if you are very handy at noise reduction, you can get away with shorter total exposures. Now, just to give you an idea of what you can do with nothing but making the exposure short and basically some proper processing, the next picture I'm going to show you is a stack of about 23 3-minute subs. And the first quarter moon was in the sky while I took this shot from my driveway, from that observing site that I showed you there. And so here is the Crescent Nebula taken from the city with the moon in the sky. And you can see that although not as good as what I would get from dark skies, there's still lots of detail available in the middle of the nebula. You even get some of the cloud that's surrounding it. Had to work a bit to get rid of a light pollution gradient in this image, which is why it's a little darker at the top and the bottom. But it'll give you an idea of just what you can get with nothing but a DSLR and sort of keeping your exposures short enough, but then shooting lots and lots of them. So some more notes on exposure here. DSLRs tend to have a lower full well depth than dedicated astro cameras. There's a couple of reasons for that. Some of them are related to the way photographers, daylight photographers, like to work, and this concept of ISO that is somewhat meaningless to a digital camera, but is faked in a DSLR. And it also has to do with the fact that some of these cameras, a lot of these cameras only have 14-bit ADCs as opposed to full 16-bit systems. So basically, if you take a look at my Canon 60DA as an example, if I shoot 2 or 3 minute subs from my driveway, that's about as far as I want to go, because my sky background hits what you would call sort of a medium to dark gray in that time. Okay, it might be kind of crappy reddish given the light pollution, but it's got a background level of about 4,700 in 3 minutes. The catch is, because it's only a 14-bit ADC, that's 32% of my full well depth. And that can be a little limiting. What that means is my background is up at this point, and a lot of my stars are likely to saturate because this point is at 32% of the maximum that I can actually record. If you take a look at the zoo camera, now totally different gain here, but I can shoot 10 minutes from my urban driveway, and I still get that same background level of about 4,700, but because it's a 16-bit system, it's only 7% of the full well depth. So I have lots of room left over to keep star color. By the way, these numbers of 17% of, or 7% of the full well depth and 32% make an assumption. And the assumption is that the camera can actually properly sample all the way up to its full well depth. That's not quite true with DSLRs, which is why they have a variable gain amplifier, the ISO amp in them. But it's close enough to get a good idea of the comparison. 7% from the Astro camera and 32% of the full well depth from the DSLR. So to sort of put this in a little graphical form, take a look at the Zoo camera on my setup. And I shoot here, although you can't see it on the horizontal scale because it drops into the black here. This is a gain of 100. And it's got 13.5 photographic stops for a dynamic range. If you look at even some of the best DSLRs that are out there, we're talking, this is ISO 800 around here, and we're talking maybe 9 stops, maybe just a little more than 9. So I have a substantially better dynamic range on the Astro camera than I get from my DSLR. The Canon 60DA is the blue line down here, by the way. And you can see that it's at ISO 800, it's about 7, roughly 6 3/4 thereabouts. And it's completely a function of the camera design. It's the DSLR has a variable gain amplifier to simulate ISO, and that means that you will saturate fairly easily compared to the Zoo camera, which has a much lower gain, electrical gain here, but still has low enough noise that you get this wonderful dynamic range. So the next thing I would encourage everybody who's doing urban imaging, and even those that aren't, even if you're in a dark sky, this makes a big difference. Use a light shade. Now, there's a difference between a light shade and a dew shield. The light shade is intended to block off-axis light. A dew shield will do some of that. And in my refractor here, this is the dew shield. As you can imagine, the actual lens element is back here, and this is a dew shield in front of it. The problem with just using a dew shield to try and block off-axis light is, if I can get my mouse to come back, the light from this big street light over here, as an example, would come in off-axis, and if this light shield right here were not in place, it would just catch the upper lip on this side of my dew shield. It would then bounce around inside the dew shield, even though it's blackened, and it would get into the camera and produce a light gradient. You have to remember that when you're exposing an image for 3, 4, or 10 minutes, you've got that long to integrate this light pollution coming in, even though it's coming in at very low levels from a reflection off a black surface. It just simply ends up giving you a gradient in your image. The light shield here stops that. The reason it stops it is it protrudes out far enough so that this edge right here, Judy, just shake your head up and down if you can see my mouse where I'm pointing there. Okay, just wanted to make sure. What the light shield does is it keeps this edge of the dew shield in shadow. So there is no light getting in there and bouncing around. The downside to this technique is that you do have to move this around depending upon what target you're using. I just Velcro it in place and I can easily move it as the night goes on. It's useful even when imaging from a dark sky site. Believe it or not, you can get light gradients from, for instance, the Milky Way or a star that's just out of the field of view. This approach tends to prevent that. So it works better than a dew shield because there's no internal reflections like there is in a dew shield. It just keeps the whole aperture in shadow. Give you an idea, here's an image that was taken from my urban site, and admittedly it uses a light pollution filter, but it also uses that light shield. And you can see there's no gradient across that image at all. Right? It turned out really well. And, oops, sorry. This particular picture of my telescope was while it was taking this image. So you can picture that even with this light right over here, which is bright enough to light up the whole telescope, even on the backside, there's no gradient in the image just by sticking a light shield on there. If I hadn't put the light shield there, even though I'm using a light pollution filter, I would still have a gradient across that image that I have to work to get rid of. The next tip I can give people is invest in a light pollution filter. And this is different advice than I've given in the past. There's a reason for that, and we'll get into it here in just a minute, but I can tell you they help a lot. I purchased an Optolong L-enhanced filter. It's not the sharpest cutoff filter out there, but it is quite reasonable. And I discovered a few things about using it that I'll pass on here as well, because it took me a while to figure some of them out. And I'll tell you, one of them in particular threw me for a loop for about 2 months. I couldn't get a decent image when I first started using the filter. So first thing, longer exposures, longer sub-exposures rather, are needed. The reason is that you don't want a noisy background, and it reduces the light so much in the background that camera noise becomes easily visible. So you take longer subs, substantially longer subs than you would without a filter. Give you an idea, in the city with my Canon camera, I'd shoot 2 to 3 minutes without the filter. I'd shoot 15 minutes with the filter for every sub. And I've sort of standardized on that. I even use 15 minutes from dark sky sites when I want to use the filter. This one threw me for a loop, as I mentioned earlier. Never allow your software to apply any camera white balance. The reason is that this white balance that's applied by a camera assumes that the full spectrum of light is hitting the camera. And with the filter, it is not. Matter of fact, all of the light in the overlaps between the red, green, and blue sensor pixels is gone. And as a result, your camera white balance will try and dial those areas up a lot, and you get a very noisy image, no matter how long an exposure you use. I've actually shot images where when I was trying to figure this out, where I was in a dark sky site, our cottage, as a matter of fact, on the Myra River, and I shot for an hour on one sub, and the background was still noisy. And it was because the camera white balance was being applied. As soon as I turned that off, I had a wonderful image out of it. Shoot new flats with your filter in place. Even if you think the filter is big enough that you won't get vignetting, shoot some new flats. A couple of reasons for that. The filter does produce a mild amount of vignetting, and it's also another element in the optical chain that can have dust bunnies. So shoot flats and don't worry about it. And as I had mentioned earlier, if you're using one of these filters, be prepared for longer total exposures. Where you might have gotten away with an hour or two before, consider 2 to 5 hours worth of data. The filter does lose quite a bit of light. It doesn't lose a lot of light in the bands that it passes, but in order to get a decent sky background, it does lose a lot of light in the bands that it rejects. So you have to get a longer total exposure to bring the sky background back down and make it nice and quiet. This will give you an idea of these modern dual, tri, and quad band filters. This particular plot is the spectrum that's passed by the Optolong L-enhance. You can see it's got a very narrow band pass here at hydrogen alpha wavelengths. And then it's got a band pass which is a little wider that encompasses O3 and H beta as well. And remember I said that this is different advice than I would have given you a few years ago when I would have said, don't use a light pollution filter because they really screw up the color balance, and it's virtually impossible to get a nice image. These modern filters pass red, green, and blue, and you actually get a well-balanced image out of them. And the stars even have lots of color. For the most part, you can get very natural looking stars out of these filters, as opposed to the stars you used to get, which have big red halos around them, using older light pollution filters that didn't pass enough in the blue and green end of the spectrum. And some of those old light pollution filters actually wouldn't pass much HA. A lot of them were made for visual work, and they passed data up here because, of course, your eye is not very sensitive to HA. So, or hydrogen alpha, I should say. So it's actually a big improvement in some of these more modern filters. Like I said, they're available in, this one's I would call this a dual band filter just because of my background in electronics, and what I would call, that would be one band to me. But this is actually sold as a tri-band because it passes 3 spectral lines. I believe the filter that Jerry is using is a quad band. It actually, oh, there goes my mouse again. It actually passes the sulfur band down here as well. I believe that's correct, isn't it, Jerry?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. So, you know, they are available in a variety of setups. You can get them that are narrower, that pass narrower bandwidths here, and they get more expensive, obviously, but I will caution people against some of the really narrow bandwidth filters. They are interference filters. They work by having layers in the filter that are a certain thickness, so that reflections off of both edges of that layer will cancel out, and you can notch out all of this area. The problem with that is that if you have fast optics, it actually shifts these bands, and the filters become so narrow that the HA band will actually show up here, and you won't actually pass any hydrogen alpha light through the filter. So although the really narrow band ones do work very well, they do have some issues with fast focal ratios, so watch out for that. That's sort of the reason I went to the L-enhance, is it works well even down to about f5. Below about f5, you begin to see some of the effects, and I have heard reports that people using telescopes down around f2 and f3 are actually having trouble with the L-enhance and basically can't use any of the sharper filters. So watch out for that. So when the pandemic kicked off, actually just a little before that, I picked up this filter and I started doing a series of experiments. I ended up doing them on each camera, but the idea was to try and figure out what would be a good sub-exposure for the camera with the filter in place. I had long since figured out that shooting from dark skies, I would use 5 to 7 minutes with my 60 DA and 2 to 3 minutes in the city. Of course, that was completely different once I put the filter on. So I ran another bunch of experiments, and I didn't do them as well as I should have when I was imaging with the 60 DA. The reason was that my schedule and weather conspired to make very little imaging time, and I wanted to get some images as well, not just experimenting. So as a result, I took a little bit of a scattershot approach when I was doing it with the 60 DA. I would shoot, 15 minutes one night, 5 minutes the next night, 10 minutes some other night. And it was based solely on how bright the target was. It really wasn't based on trying to get a progression to see what worked best. But to give you an idea, here's an urban shot of Orion's sword. And as most people in the club will know, M42, or the Orion Nebula, is a wonderful emission nebula, and it glows red due predominantly to emissions from hydrogen. And the if you can picture, the electrons are bumped up an energy level due to the extreme UV output of some of the stars in the trapezium. when they drop back to the ground state, they give off that characteristic red glow that we all sort of like to see. This particular shot uses a filter. Whenever you see me reference filter here, it's the Optolong L-Enhance. And it's 160 minutes of 10-minute subs shot at f7 for those that are curious about exposures. And I will let people know the exposures for each of the images here as we go, because it can help you figure out what exposure will work well for you, maybe save you some of the mistakes that I made as I went along. But at any rate, I also took some shorter subs in this one for the core, because M42 is very bright in the core and dimmer in the outer areas. And I was using my 60 DA for this. I had to sort of take 2 shots to cover the whole dynamic range. Turns out that the subs could have been longer than 10 minutes. I've sort of standardized on 15 minutes when using the filter, both from urban and dark sky sites now. But at the time, it was a bit of an experiment to see. And the total exposure, typically when I'm using the filter, are between 2 and 5 hours. You can see we're a little over 2 hours here. And this gives you an idea of the results you can get from the city. This particular shot is the one we just talked about, and it's taken from my front driveway underneath that street light. And you can see that the combination of a light shade and a filter do a really nice job in bringing out a lot of that nebula, even with a DSLR. The Canon 60 DA is more red sensitive than an unmodified DSLR, but even with an unmodified camera, you will get some wonderful data in here. You just won't quite get that as red. So there's another thing I found out, especially when using the filter. It's a good rule of thumb to have anyway, but it's critical when using one of these filters, is that let the histogram be your guide to exposure. Take a couple of test shots. Now, this is a histogram from the image that you just saw. It's the histogram before I stretched it to produce all that wonderful data. And you can see this is the histogram of the luminance channel, so the brightness of the target. And you notice it's not clipped. Everything looks pretty good. Don't fool yourself by just looking at the luminance histogram, though. Take a look at, in this case, the green histogram from that same shot. You'll notice it's clipped down here. The red histogram was clipped as well. The blue was not. So what happened was the combination of those 3, which produces the luminance histogram, didn't look clipped, but 2 of the color channels actually were. And what that did was it made for that characteristic noise that you see where you get color speckles throughout the image, and you really have to do quite a bit of work to get rid of it. It's a function of me not being careful and allowing the couple of the color channels to clip, even though the luminance looked good. So make sure you check all 3 color channels, especially when using the filter, because the filter will have different roll-offs for each color. So next on the list, taken through the 60 DA camera, was the Heart Nebula. So Heart Nebula is about 7,500 light years away in the Perseus arm of the galaxy. And as far as we're concerned, looking out into space, it's in the constellation Cassiopeia, and it was discovered by Herschel in around 1787. Now, give you an idea of the details for this image. Again, it was the Canon 60 DA. It had the filter in place. This was 3 hours instead of about an hour and a half-ish. Or sorry, about 3 hours. A little bit longer than the previous exposure of 160 minutes. But in this case, I used 15-minute subs. And in my processing, I lost some star color. The stars sort of bleached white. It really wasn't a function of the 15-minute subs. It was a function of me screwing up in the processing. But this will give you an idea. Again, taken underneath that street light here in the city, this is the core of the Heart Nebula. I know I'll screw this up. The cluster in the center is Mawat 15, I believe. But you can see that even here, I did bleach a lot of the stars a little bit white on my 15-minute exposure. And again, it was due to processing more than anything. So same target, taken with a completely different camera. This is now taken with my Zoo camera. After I figured out all of the issues with exposure. But just to give you an idea, this is a 6-frame mosaic covering the same target. There are 4 15-minute filtered subs in each frame, so it's only an hour per frame. It really needs more exposure. And the filter in the light shade helped me to avoid that light pollution gradient that we talked about. And you really have to do that when you're assembling mosaics. Having a gradient across in each of those frames makes it virtually impossible to get a good mosaic. This was taken, as I said, with the Zoo camera, and it gives you an idea of, it's a shame I can't show this at full resolution, but this is one that's going to get printed on canvas and put on the wall here. You get the idea that the Canon camera was only showing this area right here, but because I could now shoot mosaics with no gradient across the frames, you can get the full target in. So that's a rather large target for my setup, but it gives you an idea of what you can do from the city with relatively short total exposures. Each sub-exposure was still 15 minutes. I did get a little later to dark skies, and I've always wanted to get a nice shot of the Dumbbell Nebula, and I've had a few that were okay for the core, but they never really showed the outer envelope on M27. And M27 is one of those targets that is bright enough and big enough that it's nicely visible, even in binoculars, but it's not the easiest target to photograph if you want to get the really faint outer areas. And I can tell you it's virtually impossible to get them without a narrowband filter. The exposure details for this are, again, 140 minutes of 10-minute filtered subs. This was at a dark sky site. It's at our cottage, which has skies approximately as dark as St. Croix, maybe just a little bit brighter. And you can see that by adding the filter to the imaging chain, you get all the faint outer envelope in the nebula. And you still get all the detail in the core, which is quite nice. And hopefully it's coming through on Zoom, but you'll notice that there's even star color here. Using that filter, you still get red stars, white stars. There's a couple of yellow stars over here. You get the idea that you can get some decent star color even on targets like this with modern light pollution filters. You don't get the those really sort of crappy looking red stars with big halos anymore. Next in the course of my experimentation is the Horsehead Nebula. Now, this again is an urban shot, and by this time, I've pretty much finished up figuring out what exposures I needed for my Canon camera. And I decided to take a little more logical approach. And I started, with shorter exposures and worked my way up with the Zoo camera. So I went back to 10-minute exposures, knowing that 15 worked well for the Canon. I didn't want to go down to 5 because I thought that was a little short, given what I had found from my experimenting with the Canon filter, with the Canon camera rather. So I tried 10-minute subs with the filter. This particular shot was taken with a fair amount of wind in my driveway. And unfortunately, the wind was coming from the west, which is from across the street, and I don't have anything to block it. So I ended up using something called Sigma exclusion stacking to get rid of a lot of the trails on the stars due to wind. It threw out some of that data. And the red channel peak was close to the left side of the histogram, so it made noise reduction a little tricky. But again, this was the first image in my sequence of experiments with the Zoo camera. And you can see the result. keeping in mind that this is taken underneath those bright skies I showed you earlier with that big street light right across the street. Fortunately, I'm not looking right into that street light, but I am looking into the brightest part of my sky, which is over Halifax, since Bedford is north of Halifax. I got this shot, was very pleased with how well the horsehead showed. The problem I had was most of the stars were white. There's a few reddish stars. And after I did some hunting, it's mostly processing again that did that. But also, there's not a lot of colorful stars, as it turns out, around the horsehead. Most of them are white and blue. So next on the list was the rosette. So this nebula is another H2 region. It's located at the end of a giant cloud in Monoceros. And there's a nice open cluster in the middle, NGC 2244, and it's responsible for making the whole nebula glow. And it was the next experiment with the Zoo camera after the horsehead. And you'll notice I reduced the exposure here. And what I was trying to do is to verify rather, that the star color problem I had in the horsehead was due to processing and not due to the fact that I took 15-minute subs. So same exposures, same total exposure as the horsehead, right? But there weren't a lot of colorful stars in the horsehead area. And again, I screwed up the processing a bit, didn't quite mask the stars enough and got too lazy to go put the color back in. But you can see that with that filter and a light shade, you get all sorts of red in the nebula. You get the bluer areas of the nebula from the H beta line that the filter passes quite nicely. There are a few red stars in the image, but again, you'll notice I bleached most of them to white because I saturated them in the processing. So this is what I would call the first really good filtered image that I got off of the new Zoo camera. And the target was the Sol Nebula. It more than fills the field in my camera. And it was the next experiment with the Zoo camera. And it's 3 hours of 15-minute exposures. I kept much more stark color in the processing this time, and the additional few minutes of exposure pulled all three color channels that we talked about further away from the left side of the histogram, which made the noise reduction much less intensive. I was able to cut back on it substantially and got a much nicer image as a result. So if you take a look here, you can see that there are various star colors throughout the image. We've got, reddish stars here and here, a few bleached white stars. There's blue stars up here. Hopefully that's coming across through zoom. And the nebula itself stands out quite well against a nice dark background. Again, this is a shot taken from, if you're familiar with the Bortle scale, I've got Bortle 7 skies. There's one more step, which would be Bortle 8, which you could consider downtown Halifax. They don't get a whole lot brighter than my skies, and I'm still able to get nebulae like this. Now, from my urban site, I did try some galactic imaging. And a couple of tips in imaging these things. Obviously, you don't want the filter in. Although I have to give Jerry credit, he's got some very interesting galaxy shots with a version of this filter in place to get some of the H alpha regions in the galaxy. And I would be tempted to, rather than shoot that completely with the filter, I'd probably shoot it without the filter and then a couple of filtered shots to add in the red later. The reason is that the galaxies tend to be a much broader light source. It's not narrow band like some of these nebulae. So you do lose a lot when you attempt to image a galaxy with a filter. So this was the Zoo camera. And I took advantage of that wonderful full well depth on this camera that we talked about earlier. So these are 10-minute unfiltered subs looking into the light pollution of Halifax. And my plan was to see how many stars saturated when I didn't use the filter, even with 10-minute subs from the city. And I tried both 5 and 10-minute subs. 5 worked, 10 minutes seemed to work a little bit better. So here's the first galaxy I shot in the middle of the pandemic from my urban site, and it's NGC 4725. And it's the brightest member of the Coma 1 group. So it's in the Coma Sculptor cloud. And it's actually interacting with a nearby galaxy, NGC 4747, and it's pulling a tidal arm out of that galaxy. It's a little difficult to see in the image on Zoom, but it shows up quite nicely on my computer screen here. And it's just over 4 hours of, in this case, 5-minute subs at f7. And even though I'm using 5-minute subs, there are only 34 stars in that image that's saturated. All of the rest were unsaturated. So here's that galaxy. You can see the nice faint outer envelope, and you might be able to make out, Zoom really kills this, there's a tidal tail being pulled this way and this way from this small galaxy. And again, lots of nice red stars, lots of white stars, blue stars, no green stars, but you know, decent star color throughout, even though this is a 5-minute sub from the city. Next on my galaxy imaging list was M51. I tend to shoot M51 with every new setup, whether it be telescope, camera, or filter, because it's a relatively small target and it's a good test for how much resolution you're getting out of your system. So here I increased the exposure time to 10 minutes. Again, this is with a dedicated Astro camera with a very good full well depth. I would never try this with my DSLR. I'd be limited to about 3 minutes. Red histogram peaked somewhere around 2790, but the green histogram was up at 4740. That's a function of the Zoo camera. Most Zoo one-shot color cameras tend to have a little bit of a green bias, and you correct that in your processing. In this case, 42 stars rather than the, I think it was 30 on the last image, had saturated cores, but they didn't saturate so much that it couldn't recover the color from the star halos. So this is M51, lots of exposure, still lots of star color as an example. Good detail on the galaxy. You've got the tidal tail here and the big tidal tail being pulled off here, all of which is visible from the city. You've even got some faint outer galaxies like this one here. There's another one just off the frame up here. I cropped this image slightly. So these are all urban images that you can get from the city in the middle of a pandemic if you work on making sure your exposure is right, use a filter and a light shade. And these all used a light shade, even though this didn't use a filter. If I didn't use the light shade, there'd be a big gradient across here, and removing that gradient would remove some of these tidal tails on the galaxies. So as restrictions eased, I did get out to do some dark sky imaging. And so I wanted to play with the filter from a dark sky site as well. Although it is a light pollution filter, it's actually a narrowband filter. So you can get some enhancement of detail from the hydrogen alpha narrowband, as well as from the O3 and H beta narrowband slices in the frequencies that are passed. Okay, so we just talked about that. You can enhance even dark sky shots if the target is something like an emission nebula that's got lots of energy being emitted in the bandwidths that the filter passes. One shot was M16 taken from St. Croix. 3 shots came from our cottage at Marion Bridge. There was the Ghost of Cassiopeia, the Tulip Nebula, and a shot called the Squid Nebula. And that one was definitely a challenge even from dark skies. We'll take a look at that one at the end. So I went out to St. Croix with the intention of capturing the pillar region in the Eagle Nebula, the sort of pillars of creation region. I wasn't as interested in the odor nebulosity in the target. I really was trying to concentrate on that famous Hubble Pillars of Creation shot. And so it's 2 hours of 5-minute filtered subs, again at f7. The 5-minute subs were used because the pillars region is so bright that I would get a lot of saturation of stars and even some of the nebulae, or nebula rather, if I had have gone with longer exposures. So I cut back to 5 minutes. I figured that that would sort of kill a lot of the faint detail in the odor nebula, but it turned out it didn't, because it was nice dark skies and the camera was quite sensitive to hydrogen alpha wavelengths. I ended up being able to get a lot more detail than I thought in those 2 hours. The filter, however, really helped in bringing out detail and preventing the stars from bloating. Even the white stars in the pillar region turned out pretty good. So this will give you an idea. Here's the pillars. Here's all that faint odor area that I really wasn't trying to capture, but because of the sensitivity of the camera and the wonderful dark skies at St. Croix, I was able to get all of this stuff. So here's the pillar region after I reprocessed it to get a really good view of the data that I was able to take. And as I said here, this is taken with the Hubble telescope from sea level. So this is a effectively 120 millimeter apo refractor from underneath all of our atmosphere. It's not quite sea level, but compared to where Hubble is, it's at sea level. Here's what you get for another few $1 billion. Much more detail, but still in all, that little 120 millimeter telescope holds up pretty well against this when you think of the cost difference. So that'll give you an idea of what you can get from the pillar region with just a small telescope and a good narrowband filter. It really brought out a lot of the detail that you can see. A lot of the detail, for instance, like this ridge line here in the nebula, you can see it here in the Hubble shot. I was just really pleasantly surprised at the amount of detail you could pull out with just a small telescope in the middle of a pandemic. Next up, I know Dave Hoskin shot this target from the city, and I'm sure he can attest to the fact that it's a tricky one to process because one half of the nebula is, relatively speaking, bright. The other half is extremely dim. And urban testing showed me that 15-minute subs worked well. So I tried 15-minute subs from our dark sky site at our cottage. And excuse me, I got the hiccups. So this was 5 hours now of 15-minute subs filtered. And part of the object is very faint. So we really needed long exposures to be able to bring out some of that faint detail, thus the 5-hour total exposures. And the filter helped in a couple of ways. One, to bring out the dim areas by suppressing the sky background. But the other thing it did is it helped control some of the star bloat, in particular Navi, which is a fairly bright star in the field. The combination of the filter and very nice optics in the refractor kept the halo from that star from destroying a lot of the image. And you can see here's Navi here, and there's very little halo that's extending into the rest of the image. This is the bright portion of the nebula. And there's actually a neat view of this area. If you look at it, tilt your head a bit so that becomes vertical. It looks like a Star Wars character sitting on the throne. The Emperor, I think it was. At any rate, this section of the nebula here is quite bright. That's probably the wrong way to put that. It's dim, but it's much brighter than this section of the nebula. So to bring this out is actually a fair amount of work with some masks and a couple of interesting stretches, because you don't want to bring this out and have a huge halo on this star that destroys the rest of the nebula. So it was kind of a marathon effort in processing this image, but I was quite pleased with how it finally turned out. Again, that's filtered, taken from dark skies. Next up on the list, again, from dark skies at our cottage. Over the summer, I was fortunate enough that the travel restrictions were eased and I was able to drive to our cottage in Marion Bridge and set my telescope up and image away for 2 weeks straight. And I actually had, out of the 2 weeks, 3 clear nights. So I managed to get a target a night. That may not sound like great luck, but having 3 clear nights on your vacation is actually not bad. Generally speaking, I get a night or 2 down there if I'm lucky. So SH2-101 is the Tulip Nebula. This particular shot was interesting for a number of reasons, not the least of which is Cygnus X1, the first black hole candidate, is in the field. And the exposure, unfortunately, I had intended to get another 4 or 5 hours on this. It was cut short by cloud. It was the last night I was collecting data before I had to drive back to the city at the end of my vacation. So I got 120 minutes of 15-minute subs. Excuse me. Again, using the Zoo camera. And I had to work quite a bit with some masks to prevent the monochrome red look that shows up in a lot of images of this target. A lot of that completely red look in the nebula is a function of how strong the HA emission is compared to the O3 emission. And the filter actually accentuates that difference. So you have to work a bit at it. But this will give you an idea. Here's the tulip. You know, here's the red area of the Milky Way. First pass at processing this, all of this area and all of this area, the gas and dust that you can see there, at least I hope you can see it through Zoom, that became very red. So I had to work to sort of keep that from turning basically this color everywhere. For those that aren't familiar with Cygnus X1, it's in orbit around this star, or I guess it's a mutual orbit. And I did some more playing around with this image afterward. Once I found out that Cygnus X1 was in the field, I didn't intentionally image it to get Cygnus X1. I just wanted a nice shot of the tulip and what's known as the tulip stem here. But turned out that I did get some data out of this image that actually shows some detail that is caused by Cygnus X1. It's a black hole. Of course, you can't image a black hole, at least not with my little 120 millimeter. But at any rate, I was surprised to find out that you can, however, image some of the effects of that black hole. So if we take a look, Cygnus X1, like I said, after playing around with the image, some of the detail popped out. And for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a stellar mass black hole with a mass of about 21 times the sun. And surprisingly enough, in that image, once you process it appropriately, there are some relativistic jets and a bow shock where one of those jets slams into the interstellar medium and the stellar wind from a nearby bright star. And here they are. So here's that image stretched rather grossly, but take a look. Here's that bow shock right there. Here's one of the relativistic jets, and here's the other one that comes out and then sort of curls over this way, as they tend to do when they run out of steam and plow into the interstellar medium. But this is a shot that actually shows detail, which really surprised me, caused by Cygnus X1 on the surrounding environment, and it's taken with a 120 millimeter telescope. Now, mind you, from dark skies, but still in all, I was rather surprised that you could actually capture that. As I said, I didn't intentionally go about doing it. I was talking to a friend about black holes, and he mentioned that in our conversation that Cygnus X1 is near the Tulip Nebula. And I said, I just took a shot of that. I'll go look. And there it was. So last shot we're going to take a look at here, again, taken during the pandemic, but from dark skies, is the Squid Nebula. Now, the only thing I can say about the Squid Nebula is that sucker is faint. It's extremely faint, and there is basically no way I could capture this, no matter how dark my skies, without a narrowband filter. You really need a filter to pull the blue emission from this target, sort of bluish green emission, out from the surrounding red nebula. The red nebula, by the way, this shot is 4 hours of data, 15-minute subs, again from my cottage, Bortle 3 skies. The red nebula is called the Flying Bat Nebula, and I have no idea where they came up with that name. I don't see the remotest sign of a bat in that particular target, but at the core of it is the Squid Nebula. And this one was a real challenge to process. To try and pull the faint blue emission out of the overwhelming red background took me about 20 hours of processing. And it's not 20 continuous hours, it's a few hours and find, oh crap, I made a mistake, and go back to square one and do it all over again, and do that several times. When I finally figured out, however, how to process this target, here's the squid. This sort of semicircular section here of HA emission is part of the Flying Bat Nebula. Again, I have no idea why it's called that. It just does not look like a flying bat. The squid, however, does look a little like a squid. So just sort of in closing, before we open it up to questions here, remember, don't let the pandemic stop you from either capturing the night sky or looking at the night sky. If you're going to try and image it and you're stuck in an urban location, use the appropriate exposures. Use a modern light pollution filter if you can get one. You do not need a telescope to use these filters. Several of them come with clip-in versions that will clip in your camera and allow you to use your camera with a regular lens. Block any off-axis light with a light shield. And I can't stress this enough. It is critical. It is especially critical if you're using a DSLR with a mirror. Some of the more modern DSLRs are mirrorless. They don't suffer from the problem I'm about to describe, but the ones that have a mirror have the sensor buried down at the bottom of what's called the mirror box. Basically, if you can picture the mirrors at the top of a small rectangular area, and the sensor is at the bottom of that area. And the problem is light coming in hits one edge of that box, and it actually causes a brighter strip at the bottom or the top of your image. Usually you end up cropping it out or working really hard to process it away. And a light shield virtually eliminates that. It gets rid of a lot of that off-axis light. So if you're having trouble with images having a bright band at the bottom, put a light shield on, even if you're in dark skies, blocking the general sky glow from coming in off axis will help with that bright band that you see on some DSLR images. And finally, you will be surprised what you can capture even under urban skies. Despite the title of the recent Netflix movie, Look Up, and take images of what's up there. It's something you can do. The sky is free, even when there's a pandemic and you're locked down. I think that's everything. There we go. Jerry, I know you've been watching the chat there for any questions that were coming up. I'm going to try and pull it up here.
Well, strangely enough, there was only one, and I posted it.
There we go. I have not tried it using the Hubble palette yet. I may go back and reprocess that data. There are a couple of reasons I haven't done that. One, the biggest one is I have a one-shot color camera. And what that means is in order to get the data, turn my camera back on here. In order to get the Hubble palette, one of the frequencies you need is the sulfur band. And a one-shot color camera is not able to isolate the sulfur band from the hydrogen alpha band. They're both in the red channel. I could take two images and use a true sulfur band narrowband filter, but just way too much work. I'm lazy. There are ways of faking it, and sometimes they work well, sometimes they don't. I just haven't tried it yet. You can sort of add channels in certain weights to try and simulate the sulfur band, but I haven't tried that yet.
There are some video instructions on faking the actual bands, and it seems to work.
Yeah, I've watched those. I haven't played around with the data as of yet. It's something I might try in the future, though. Any other questions?
Yep, there was one from Kim Hay that asked, is the light shield like a dew shield? Can you explain the differences again, please, Blair?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to share my screen again, simply to get back to that picture. Bear with me.
Sure. And from Tony, is a dew shield, oops, sorry, lost my chat, just a second. I guess tied into that might be the question, is a dew shield that has a black matte finish inside the same as a light shield? You might want to answer both of those, Blair.
Yeah, the answer to, there we go, there's the image I'm looking for. The answer to Tony's question is no, it is not. This light shield is actually part of what I used to use as a dew shield. And it is the sort of blue foam with the black felt on the inside, but it does not completely go around the aperture. If it were to completely go around the aperture, it will suffer, which would make it a dew shield, by the way. It suffers then from internal reflections. Because of this bright light in the image over here, if this were to continue all the way around, it would catch the upper edge here. And even though the interior is blackened, when you have long sub-exposures or a long total exposure, that light bounces around inside the dew shield and does get into the optics, and it causes a gradient. But by only putting, in this case, that's probably not quite 180 degrees around, somewhere between 120 and 180 works well. And what it does is it ensures that the actual dew shield right here, even at the edge, is completely in shadow. As a result, you don't get any light getting in and bouncing around inside the dew shield and getting to the optics. So that's basically the difference, Kim, between a dew shield in this case and my light shield. The dew shield, if I had made this into a dew shield, would go all the way around, and then it would be subject to those internal reflections, because there'd be something on this side for it to for the light to reflect off of. In this case, there isn't, and it just simply casts a shadow over the full aperture of the telescope.
Okay. From Fabian is the question, is your ZWO a cooled camera? How much difference do you think that it would make?
It is a cooled camera, and it doesn't make a squat of difference. The wonderful noise performance of that camera is a function of the sensor. Yes, cooling it does help, but it turns out with modern sensors, cooling it doesn't help that much anymore. If you're doing scientific imaging and you want the absolute quietest image you can get, then cooling helps. Give you an idea, the noise cuts down by, if I remember correctly, by about half every 6 or 7 degrees that you cool the sensor. The problem is that with modern sensors, you're starting from a point where there's virtually no noise. To give people an idea, at least the imagers out there that are familiar with the terminology, an idea of just how quiet some of these new sensors are, the sensor used in that zoo camera, admittedly, when cooled to 0 degrees, doesn't even generate a single electron of noise in 20 minutes. So basically, there is no noise contribution from that sensor in a 20-minute sub. If I remember correctly, when cooled to -20, there's no noise contribution in almost 2.5 hour sub. And after that, you start to see a little bit of noise. But in 2.5 hours, you've saturated the sensor. So you're really no better off. It really amounts to the sensor more than the cooling these days. Now, I know that's contrary to what a lot of people believe, but it's just the fact that modern sensors have come a long way in about the last 5-10 years.
Okay, and last question from Tony. Do you cover how to do mosaics in one of your videos? And if not, can you?
I have not as of yet, and yes, I can. The mosaics are not as hard as you might think. There's not a lot of work to actually putting the mosaic together. We can cover it very quickly in the next image processing session that I do, Tony. Basically, what you do is you take all your subs, making sure you have sufficient overlap. You store them all in the appropriate format, which happens to be 16-bit TIFF. You send them all over to a piece of software. The one that I use is Microsoft Image Composition Editor. You press go, you get some coffee, and you come back and your mosaic is done. And then from there on, you process it like it was just a regular image. It's really not much effort at all to actually build the mosaic. You can do it manually, but I wouldn't advise it.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Blair. I'm sure there's a lot of information there for people to digest, but because this is recorded, you will certainly have, members will certainly have an opportunity to review this again and see what you've done in your experimentation and perhaps come up with their own results as well to share, and maybe even share in our photo montage in months to come.
No problem.
So thank you so much, and we'll certainly work with you about looking into perhaps doing something about mosaics.
Yep.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, next up is Chris Young, who will be giving us another installment of the Sky Lore. This one involves the Pleiades. A long time observed. I forget the exact title, but Chris, I'll let you take it. And please tell us all the sky lore related to Pleiades, that wonderful object in the sky.
Just a sec. View screen 2. Share. So I think you've got the image there.
Yep.
Good. So it's not going to cover all of the Pleiades. I initially thought, well, maybe I could do something on the Pleiades and maybe I'd have enough information to kind of stretch it rather than just have 2 or 3 stories to go. So after a while, I realized that the Pleiades is more like a doctoral thesis. There's a lot going on here, and so this is really a sort of a survey of what's there, and touches on a number of aspects of it, which are certainly of interest. So we're pretty much all of us are familiar with the Pleiades. This is an image, better than the human eye can see. We need optics to bring it up to this kind of definition and color. And this is what we would see in the in the Western Hemisphere. In the Southern Hemisphere, things are reversed. The Pleiades is up here in the top left. We have Orion upside down over here, and the Hyades in between, and Aldebaran. So the Pleiades is visible literally all over the world, and plays a role in pretty much all of the cultures. Previously, on another, we had talked about the Hopeless Hunter, a story out of Africa, and we had 7 sisters who were the daughters of a sky god who were married to the Hopeless Hunter, who lost his arrow, and then he was between a rock and a hard place. So the stories of the Pleiades always seem to involve 7 sisters, or women, or mothers and daughters. Occasionally there's brothers and stuff in there. And as one anthropologist put it, the Pleiades was nearly always imagined as a group of 7 sisters, and their myths explain why they are only 6. So oftentimes they'll say there's 7, they can only see 6, but they have an explanation as to where the 7th went. So, and Ray Norris co-authored a paper which entitled "Why Are There 7 Sisters?" And he puts forward the notion that the story of the 7 sisters, or 7 young women, the roots of that come from Africa 100,000 years ago, and that was, if 100,000 years ago, that would give them time to spread out through Europe, up through Asia, across and through the Pacific. There are other areas which are, which are ancient, if you will, or prehistory. So this is a location of Lascaux, the caves of Lascaux, which is where we have all of the cave paintings. And this is a map of the cave. There's, I guess, 250 meters of accessible cave, and there's another couple hundred meters more of cave. And we're interested in particular with this area here, this passageway. And so here we are inside the cave, and we have these marvelous paintings on the ceiling of the cave. And we're going to look particularly right here on this area. And here's a more direct photo of it. And what's of particular interest is the fact that we have 7 dots up here, 6 dots actually, when I count them. And maybe there's 4 down here, and I really wish there were 3, because when you overlay the kind of a star pattern on them, we get close to what we would see as being the Pleiades, Taurus, and Orion. Now, the fact that there aren't 3 down for the belt of Orion seems to weaken the argument a little bit, because anybody who has the observational skills to have captured the detail on these animals and transcribe it here onto the surface of a cave, with little tiny lamps down in the dark, I'm sure could have kept track of that there were 3 dots. But I have no doubt that they did look up in the sky, and they saw patterns in the sky, just as we look up in the clouds, and we would see cloud patterns, and we see animals and creatures, and I'm sure they did too. And I'm sure that they did similar things of looking at the stars. So that's quite a long time ago. I think 16,000 BC, something like that. And another place the Pleiades shows up is on the Nebra disk. And Nebra is a town here in Germany. This map is gold deposits that were around at the time of the Bronze Age. Cornwall is up here, and we think that the gold in the Nebra disk, which is right here, they've done a lot of analysis and believe it comes from Cornwall. There was a lot of trading back and forth through Europe and Asia. I mean, there was their own kind of Silk Roads for trading things. The copper there is some copper that's in this. The bronze is has copper in it. Comes from the mountains in Germany. There's a suggestion that maybe it also came from Cornwall. There was a lot of discussion about what the source of this shield, whether it was one, a forgery, two, that it wasn't that old, three, it might have come from the Mediterranean, from somewhere else. And all of these concerns were sort of slowly put to rest by a lot of investigation in terms and looking at the metallurgy of the metals involved. What you see here these are bronze swords and tools that were in the burial site. The site was raided by, if you will, or plundered by what we would call, I guess, grave robbers from an historic site on the top of a hill in Germany. They changed hands 4 times before they were caught in a sting operation, and then they worked it back, collected all the material, debriefed the guys who did the original theft, and collected as much information as they could. This gives you a better idea of what the condition of it is. And this is gold, and on bronze. I see that this one didn't get corrected from an older slide. Anyway, they have an electron microscope here. And so the original shield from their analysis had what we believe that's the moon, this would be the sun, and they had 32 what we will call stars around the disk. Later, they added a strip on either side. One is missing here. And then later again, they added what appears to be something kind of like a boat down here at the bottom. And from their analysis, they were also able to determine that it was probably in use for about 200 years before it was buried. And they've dated it through a number of different means. One of the things that makes it interesting, because at this age, 1600, before the Common Era, this would make it, if it is a star map, then it's the oldest star map in the world. And one of the things that they see is from the center, the subtends at an angle of 82 degrees past this arc. 82 degrees is the difference in this location in Germany between where the sun sets for the winter equinox and the solar equinox. And so these are kind of important dates to know. So that tends to locate this particularly to that location. There's in the references at the end of this talk, there's a mention of a couple of YouTube videos that go on that talk about this. And one of the sort of investigators, scholars, has mentioned that this disc would have been magic to a farmer, but would have been some kind of science to a priest. And I think that's quite right, because they would have been aware of the they have a physical object, they're looking at measuring physical things, and things change over time. So pretty interesting. There's lots of speculation still about how it was used, what it was used for, and things. But another item is a sword that was an iron sword. So we're now at Iron Age. So this is closer to the present. And on this sword, on one side, there's some gold that was put in the iron, forming a pattern. And I've overlaid another image here. This is an image of the Pleiades that's taken after Ridpath and Tiron. And of interest are number 7 and number 6. So we go, here is the sort of the top of the blade of the sword, right near the hilt. And we have a gold line here. We believe the gold was lost here. This was probably an horizon line. We believe this was the sun. The gold is missing from here, and I'm not sure whether it was there originally or whether it was lost, sort of plundered at a later date. We have a crescent moon. We have, there were three, I think there were originally 2 gold dots that were originally visible. By using X-rays, they brought that up to 5. And there's speculation that number 6 and number 7 might have been there, but it would need more elaborate analysis, which would form the Pleiades. But certainly we see that the stars are, obviously of importance. And certainly to have decorated a sword in this way, this must have been, probably kind of a senior person. So the next place we're going to go to is Malta, which is here. And I'm showing you, often show you a map before we kind of talk about individual objects to kind of give it a place, and not these are just kind of sort of different channels. And this one, I had to use this map because the source is the Central Intelligence Agency, which is, anyway, it comes from Wikipedia, but not to be missed. So Malta's of interest here because there's a Talquati sky tablet. So it's approximately 2600 BCE. And it consists of it's a piece of limestone, and it has scratches in it. There's 3 lines, and then there's a series of what appear to be stars. And when we look at, here's a full-scale replica, and it's been interpreted to be stars. We have the Pleiades, Perseus, Andromeda, Cassiopeia, and that it was used essentially as a sighting device. It was found at a temple site, which was in badly sort of disrepair. And there's been speculation about it. I'm sympathetic to the sword. I'd really want to be sympathetic about the cave painting. I'm not so sure about this one, but the reason I found this in the first place was because there was a reference to the Golden Gate of the ecliptic, which is not a term I don't think I've ever heard of. If I have, then I had forgotten. And so what we have is the Pleiades and the Hyades, and they straddle the ecliptic. And so the planets all pass through here, and the moon passes through here most of the time. And I think that's actually a useful asterism, even for us. And then one of the delights now with using Google is Google will translate things from German. So I can go to Wikipedia in German, and it translates it for me, and you get access to a lot more information. Anyway, so this is in German. So in 2500 BC, this was where the spring equinox was, directly between these two, which was of interest. And still poking around, I found an astrophoto taken from on film. Blair could no doubt do an analysis of it, and it's probably not a great copy. But we have the Pleiades and the Hyades, Aldebaran, and Jupiter and Saturn. But I'm not sure. Others may have known of the Golden Gate of the ecliptic. There's also a Silver Gate, but it seems to start to get into New Age stuff when you go chasing that one. So Australia is where we're going to go next. This is a map before colonization of the tribes, the different tribes and languages in Australia. And as you can see, it was there were a lot of different groups there. So we're in Australia, there's the Pleiades. There's a lot of commonality in the stories all across the Pleiades. It's pretty much always 7 young women, usually 7 sisters. they're being pursued by a young man or a warrior. In some cases, it's kind of there's sort of a blissful arrangement where perhaps the Pleiades are married to the men who are in the Hyades. But in other cases, you have they're in danger. These young women are in danger because they're going to be assaulted by this by this warrior who's keen to get to them. And in one of the stories has that there are, one was caught, was assaulted and died, and therefore there was only 6. This is why you can only see 6. So there's different explanations. But I believe that most of these stories which have been applied to star patterns, they have meaning. The Aborigines have an oral traditions. Part of their stories tell, and they talk about this, is because they have small groups, so they have to have rules and practices that make incest a taboo. And so I think what we have here, they talk about inappropriate relationships that are occurring. And so I think what this would be part of I guess, no doubt, a discussion and an illustration of what they're not supposed to do. So anyway, a lot of different stories, but pretty much always, in some cases, the same stories stretch 2/3 of the way across Australia, and that's rough. That's very rough terrain, mostly desert in the interior. This is one of the stories which is of I found of particular interest, and Niruna I can probably pronounce or close to it. So that's Orion, and so this is a male kind of warrior. He's very interested in the Pleiades. He's very keen. He wants to have sex, as the article puts it, with these young women. They are protected by their oldest sister, who's here. And what happens is, in order for him, Niruna, to get past the older sister, he uses fire essentially from his right hand, which is from Betelgeuse, and directs it towards the oldest sister. She responds with Aldebaran with her left foot and neutralizes this and sets him back. His fire recovers faster than the oldest sister's fire, and he begins his assault again. And the oldest sister, enlists the aid of the father dingo, the dingo dad kind of thing, who wrestles with Niruna, sort of struggles so that his fire is no longer active, and he puts a bunch of dingo puppies. This would be along one of the horns of Taurus, and you have to remember we're essentially upside down here in Australia. And this leads to further humiliation from Niruna. And so in reviewing this story, Betelgeuse is a variable star, has a period of around 400 days. Aldebaran had, from what I can find, a period of around 625 days. So this would flare up, this could flare up, but this would recover faster. The skeptics say, well, there's not a lot. Here we have a full magnitude of difference in terms of brightness. But with Aldebaran, it's like 0.2, 0.3 of a magnitude, which is perhaps not visible. So it may be that this has just been enhanced to make the story a little bit better. But it is of interest. Astronomy is an important part of their education. Australian, it's an oral education, but particularly amongst the young men as boys, don't seem to know it as well, but it becomes very important around the time of their initiation into manhood. So they would learn these things, and there's a lot of awareness of astronomical information, and they've kept track of a number of things. So quite a rich culture. So back to my CIA map. This time we're going to go to Greece. which you're probably full aware of, and the Pleiades, which is the name that we use for them, that we get from the Greeks and the Romans. So the Pleiades are the daughters of Atlas, and Atlas had led a revolt against Zeus, and for his punishment, he was supposed to be holding up the sky. This is a marble statue from the Roman period. It has a celestial globe that he's carrying, but it was believed to be a copy of Greek statue. And so that the celestial globe, which shows the constellations, if you will, from the outside, from space, would show the constellations as the Greeks would see them. So it's a kind of an important reference, if you will. So these are the stars. So we have Atlas and Pleione. They are not the Pleiades sisters. They are part of the Pleiades sisters. These are the seven sisters are here, and they've been influential through Western culture. This is a painting from around 1900, and you know, so there's and as they have been through all cultures. Next, we're going to, I don't know if that is perhaps the Midwest, Wyoming. And here we're talking about Devil's Tower. And Devil's Tower is this rock formation which sticks up out of the ground. And I guess the Kiowa and the Lakota say that there were a group of girls went out to play, and they were spotted by several giant bears who began to chase them. And in an effort to escape the bears, the girls climbed atop a rock, fell to their knees, and prayed to the Great Spirit to save them. Hearing their prayers, the Great Spirit made the rock rise from the ground towards the heavens so that the bears could not reach them. The bears, in an effort to climb the rock, left deep claw marks in the sides, which have become too steep to climb. Those marks are still there today. When the girls reached the sky, they were turned into stars of the Pleiades. So it's called Devil's Tower, which was a mistranslation of Bear's Lodge or Bear's Lair. There's been 2 attempts by the First Nations to have the name changed back to what has always been in their culture. And congressmen, and actually Congresswoman, I believe, was instrumental in blocking that because they thought it might hurt the tourist trade. The rock formation is curious. You can see the striations here. Here's a detail. So there, it's, you know, the grooves are quite real. And I was curious as to how it was formed. And so what happened is we had, this area was all sedimentary rock. And then magma pushed up from below, left this shape, and then the sedimentary rock has worn away over the ages, which left us with that tower. And so next we're going to the Pacific, and we're interested in New Zealand. These maps are lots of fun. This shows the dispersal of the Austronesian people through the Pacific, because they traveled by boat from island to island and slowly spread across the Pacific, including to New Zealand. They made it over to Easter Island, Ratatouille. And then there was a question mark on this connection because it goes over to the, I think it's the coast of Peru, South America over here, and with a sort of a question mark. But that seems to be pretty certain now because of the archaeology of things that we found in Peru that show that originally from I think it was things like chickens and breadfruit and other things that came from the Pacific. So they made it all the way across. Not a small voyage. From here to here is, I think, about 4,300 kilometers in a straight line. So, but anyway, New Zealand. So in New Zealand, we have Matakiri, and Matakiri is this center star, and is thought to be she is essentially the mother of the daughters. And Matakiri shows up in the middle of their winter in New Zealand, which is in December. So, and comes up in over a series of days because apparently the weather is bad there. can't imagine how that happens in winter. But when they can see the Matariki, which is also the name of the star cluster, then this signals the beginning of their new year, and they have a series of celebrations of where they respect the dead. There are sort of sacrifices of food for the stars, and the rising of stars in astronomy plays a large role in terms of their practices. And I guess, and as you go around the world, we also talk about when when the Pleiades show up, it often signals the beginning of either the planting season, or you should be harvesting, or that soon the weather is about to change, the seasons are changing. Shortly you'll be able to sail out on the Mediterranean. So there are many things. So they look to the sky for, as it's a clock, a calendar, and a compass. So and it's played a role in many cultures. So for further reference, I've listed a few things. I've relied fairly heavily on Wikipedia, which I found to be pretty solid. Other than if you dig too deep, you can sometimes, people put suggestions about things which are how should we say it, a little bit new age, I guess. But generally, they seem to be pretty sound information. And the Pleiades in Folklore and Myth lists over 50 countries which has myths about the Pleiades. And again, the majority of those they're young women. Anyway, so I recommend kind of visiting those. And then on YouTube, with regards to the Nebra disk, there's a couple there which are pretty good to have a look at. So that's it, Judy.
Great.
So I'll stop the share here and go
Wonderful.
back to you.
Great, thanks so much. I
Well,
always
it's
find
kind of a
Skylore so intriguing.
It's kind of a shallow survey. Unfortunately, I got into it, and then unfortunately, there's a lot of rabbit holes you can fall down, like in a lot of interesting things. And I'd be interested to know if anybody in the group was aware of the Golden Gate of the ecliptic, which I think is an interesting asterism. So anyway, but I'll throw that out there, and maybe someone can comment on it or put something on the list.
Well, I find it interesting how they developed the lore based on a need to explain the sky and how it got there, or to provide some sort of moral compass for whatever culture they're in.
Yeah, they
or
put
a combination.
That's right. They had stories, and they gave, those patterns allowed them to have stories, which allowed them to, talk about things, right? Because nothing was written down. So this was a reminder. These were important stories. So the water's deep with this stuff. Like, as I said, I thought, oh, geez, I'm not sure if it'll be long enough for, dealing with the Pleiades, but my God, it could go on for days. But anyway, I recommend the Wikipedia references and the YouTube videos. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much. We've seen Devil's Tower from, I think it was about that high in the distance, roughly when we went past it. But for those of you that watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind, it was featured.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So thanks again, Chris. And we'll move on to our next presentation from our observing chair, David Hoskin, newly appointed. And wonderful. Welcome, David. And we're looking forward to your first presentation in that role. Tell us what's up in January.
Hey, thanks, Judy. Let's see if I can share. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. I'll leave my video off so that I preserve bandwidth. Full disclosure, Dave Chapman was kind enough to provide me with his slide decks from 2021. So what I've done for this presentation is update and modify, slightly added a few new wrinkles for my own presentation. Still waiting for my RASC Observer's Handbook, although again, Dave Chapman was nice enough to send me a PDF of the US version of what's up for January, so that gave me a bit of help. So as it's probably obvious to everyone, we're past the winter solstice, days are getting longer. So the sunset on New Year's Day was at from Halifax was at 4:44 p.m. By the end of the month, the sun will be setting at 5:21 p.m. Astronomical twilight is moving forward by about 30 minutes. So we're as the days get longer, we're losing some of that wonderful night sky viewing and imaging time, but I guess on the plus side, eventually the days will also be getting warmer. So in the 1st of January, put a I'll do that. Trying to find my laser pointer. There we go. So just under 9 hours of sunlight on January 1st, and nearly 10 hours, approaching 10 hours by the end of the month. Solar activity, some interesting stuff happening. This sunspot, AR 2924. This is from spaceweather.com, and I grabbed this image this morning. This particular sunspot has quadrupled in size since it first developed, and it's as you can probably guess, it's lining up, starting to line up nicely with Earth. It hasn't yet yielded any solar flares, but the magnetic field is apparently in the process of changing, so there may be some flares coming in the next few days. The other interesting thing to keep an eye on is one of NASA's solar observing satellites is currently looking at a couple bright UV patches behind the eastern limb of the sun, and those will be rotating into view in the next day or so, and they are likely to result in some nice sunspots. So if you've got a white light filter or a Herschel wedge, definitely worth having a look at the solar disk. There's some sunspots currently in view, and maybe a few more going to be coming along. The moon this month. So we were treated to a nice, very nice crescent moon at the start of the month. This new moon is the Tom Cod spawning moon, and let's see if I can get the video. Okay, was everyone able to hear that?
No.
No, okay. So the technical issues. Oh, now we've got. Now, how do I shut this off? Okay. So things to look out for. The crescent moon is near Saturn, or was near Saturn, I guess earlier in the week, and then near Jupiter. First quarter is tomorrow, which I think the clouds are going to be back, so we probably won't be able to see it. Full moon is January 17th at 11:50 UTC. And I guess something to, a nice photo op if you're an early riser and the skies cooperate is January 29th. The moon, the crescent moon, the waning crescent will be very close to Mars. And that should give a really nice picture. Certainly visible nicely within the field of view of a pair of binoculars. The moon, things to look at in first quarter. So tomorrow night, if we're blessed with some clear skies. Again, at first quarter, the meridian is down the middle, so there's lots to see around first quarter. Different mare and craters. This is a good time to fill in some of those. Explore the moon. Goals if you're working on the explore the moon or explore the universe certificates. So see if you can observe 3 different mare and 3 different craters with binoculars at some point around January 9th. I think we do have some clear nights coming later in the week, last time I checked. So that would be appropriate. Planets in January. Mercury is currently visible in the western evening sky. It's reasonably bright, magnitude -0.7. Its greatest eastern elongation was yesterday at just over 19 degrees. So it's as high as it's going to get in the evening sky for the next little while. On January 10th to the 15th, Mercury will be near Saturn, with the closest approach to Saturn being around 5:30 p.m. on January 13th. Venus is getting very hard to see. It's very low in the west southwestern evening sky, and will reappear in mid-January in dawn twilight, climbing to about 31 degrees elongation by the end of the month. This is so here's a challenge going back to Mercury and Saturn. They'll be very close together. So see if you can see them with binoculars as they come to their closest approach. Mars is very low currently in the southeast in dawn twilight sky. It's reasonably bright, magnitude 1.5. And on January 29th, as I said previously in the moon shots, it'll be 2 degrees south of the waning crescent moon. So a nice photo op. Jupiter is gradually sinking towards the horizon. It can still be seen in the southwest evening twilight sky. Saturn is also getting quite low in the evening sky and will pretty much disappear after mid-month. Uranus is currently in Aries, magnitude 5.7. You can see this ice giant with the unaided eye from a dark site. And Neptune is in the northeastern part of Aquarius. At magnitude 7.9, it's not an unaided eye object, but is a nice binocular and telescope target if you can identify it by star hopping or have a go-to function on your telescope. I put this in because the What's Up was uploaded at the start of the month, and I was hoping for some clear skies for the quadranted meteor shower, but I didn't see any meteors. It was cloudy at the peak, which was January 3rd, and I think I had a look early morning, January 5th, and for about half hour, and I didn't see anything, at least from the city. So hopefully someone was able to see some of the meteors in this shower. There was, because of the new moon, there was no moonlight, so faint meteors would have been easy to see if the skies had cooperated. Winter constellations are quite prominent. Auriga, Gemini, Taurus, Orion, Canis Major, and Canis Minor are all visible around 10 o'clock, 10:30 from Halifax in the southeastern sky. Again, these are constellations to tick off if you're working on your Explore the Universe certificate. Winter stars associated with these constellations: Sirius, brightest star, Capellan, Rigel, Procyon, Betelgeuse, Aldebaran, Castor, Pollux, all great naked eye or unaided eye objects, easily seen even from the light pollution of a city. I can see them all from my backyard in Clayton Park. And it's good to learn these stars because they're used for sky alignment for the SynScan and the Celestron equivalent apps if you have a telescope with go-to function. Some winter deep sky objects to keep an eye on. There's a couple challenges here. The first one is Kemble's Cascade. This is an asterism found in the constellation Camelopardalis. It consists of, this is a picture I took of the cascade a couple of years ago. It consists of a line of more than 20 5th to 10th magnitude stars, and they're quite colorful. And they culminate in a open star cluster, NGC 1502. So the challenge is, if you have binoculars, to find Kemble's Cascade, and if you have a telescope, have a look at the star cluster at the bottom of the cascade. This particular asterism was named in honor of Father Lucien Kemble, who was a Franciscan friar who described this cascade of stars in a letter to the astronomer Walter Scott Houston. And Kemble was able to see this line of stars with his 7x35 binoculars. So it's an easily seen object. Other winter deep sky objects are M37, M35, the Pleiades, which we just had a nice talk on, the Hyades, of course, the Orion Nebula, and M47. Another challenge for you is if you're looking at the Orion Nebula, which is a wonderful object in binoculars or a wide field telescope, have a look at the trapezium cluster, which is this area of bright stars. This is a star forming region, and you should be able to pick out 4 stars with a low power eyepiece and a telescope. But if the scene is quite good and you're able to move up to a higher power eyepiece, see if you can see the 6 stars in the trapezium. So as I said, A, B, C, D are pretty easy to see. E is the next easiest, and the hardest one to resolve away from the brighter star C is F. So that's an interesting challenge for the coming month. And with talking about Algol, the demon star in constellation Perseus. This is an eclipsing variable star, and the maxima is, you'll see at magnitude 2.1 on January 24th. It'll reach its minima, magnitude 3.4, at around 7:13 on the evening of January 25th. So if you look at it the evening of the 24th, then have another look at it the 25th and compare it to some nearby stars, you should see it dim. And then the next evening on the 26th, it'll have brightened again. So the entire eclipse lasts just under 12 hours. And there's the period between minima is 2 days, 20 hours, and 49 minutes, shown in this graph. And this is an artist's conception of what the eclipsing binary Algol looks like. And an interesting animation here showing the process of the eclipse, which causes the star to dim and then brighten. Now, the nice thing about Algol is that you can see it at its brightest and its dimmest over a period of a few days. If you want a greater challenge, there's a Heinz crimson star, also known as R. Leporis, in the constellation Lepus, and this is a carbon star. So this is a star that's near the end of its life. It's a long period Mira variable star. And by long period, I mean it is a long period. The period between its dimmest and its brightest is about 427 days. So you got to be patient for this one. It was observed first by the British astronomer J.R. Hind in 1845, who referred to it as looking like a drop of blood on the against the black sky. And the interesting thing, though, about Heinz crimson star, apart from its brilliant crimson color, is that its magnitude varies quite dramatically from 5.5, which is unaided eye visible from a dark site, to magnitude 11.7, so only visible through a telescope. So that's something to have to at least think about while you're looking at Algol. And if you have a telescope, see if you can identify and find Heinz crimson star. So that's all for this month. Be happy to take any questions.
Any questions for David? None came through the chat, but if anyone has a question, he's certainly open to it. Just remember to unmute yourself before we begin talking. Okay, well, there doesn't appear to be any questions, Dave.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this.
I will stop the share.
Yeah, that's
you go.
great. And and certainly your presentation is on our website. So if anyone wants to review this throughout the month, it is certainly there. And you can review it via the video on our YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, and if you access it, you should be able to click the links and get the proper pronunciation of the Tom Cod's volume.
Yeah, that's always challenging through Zoom, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, and last but not least is me, and I will share my screen again. There's the agenda. So last on the agenda is the news from the board. Oop, where are we here? So, updates. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, Happy New Year, everyone. Hope everyone had a good holiday season. As it has been the custom, we have been updating members of what's going on both here at our own center as well as some of the highlights from the national office. If you have any questions or concerns, you can reach me at our email address, which is president@halifax.rasc.ca. As many of you are aware, we had our AGM on December 3rd, and we now have a new board of directors. So welcome all of them. Some news, many returning. Welcome all. And as well, at their first board meeting this past Tuesday, the appointments have been made. So Mary Lou Whitehorn continues as our honorary president for the next couple of years until 2023, I believe. And the others are there as so noted. So, and I want to extend a thank you to not only these volunteers, but also to those members who have volunteered to be on committees and for other various projects that the center puts on and offers education sessions. Many, many thanks. The member survey, as you know, was conducted twice. The responses were collated just before the holiday break, and the board have reviewed the suggestions. And what you see on the screen are some of the suggestions that were made. It's not to say that we can necessarily come through with all of them, but we are certainly working on making many of them come to fruition. Certainly, we all welcome the day when we can meet in person, and then it becomes a matter of how do we meld what we're doing now with the in-person, and what about the topics that we want to present and how they're presented, et cetera. So we are looking into that very soon. As always, there are stars within our center. And as many of you are aware, last year, the Subaru and Saltscapes staycation contest, Fiona Morris won the Subaru lease for a year. But this year, we have another member who came in second place and won the Tourism Nova Scotia 500 Getaway Package. It gives me great pleasure to announce that Jerry won the staycation contest with his photograph of take a little bit of sunset at a dash of Venus setting and sprinkle with the Milky Way. So congratulations, Jerry. Next, if you look at the journal, the latest edition of the journal, there was an article in there by Dr. Roy Bishop entitled "A Green Laser Observation Across Minas Basin." And the reason I showed the Observer Handbook is those of us that know Roy well know that anytime you ask him a question, he answers it and then says, it's in the handbook on page such and such. Well, throughout his article, in fact, that's what he based his article on, was the information based in the handbook when he shone a laser beam from Evangeline Beach over to Blomidon Provincial Park with a 5mm green laser pointer. And the two former OH editors were himself and Dave Chapman, and they conducted this experiment. So if you want to read more, please go to the latest journal and read more all about it. It's quite an interesting read. And also in that edition is a Mars sketch from Dave Chapman's logbook that he drew back in 2020. Also want to have a reminder regarding Nova Notes. It has been posted on our website for the November-December issue. And certainly if you want to submit an article for the January-February edition, please do so by midnight, February 19 to Lisa and John, and you can send it to Nova Notes Editor at halifax.rasc.ca. If you haven't read our latest edition, please do so. There is so much information packed in there, the photography, the equipment and book reviews, all sorts of things. Also want to remind people that we are still offering the Astro photos from some of our members for sale. They're $30 each, which includes your shipping and taxes. You can send the funds to the treasurer at halifax.rasc.ca. Be sure to name the photograph that you want, and as well as your name and mailing address in the notes field so that we can then send it along to you, or you can send it by check to our mailing address. And just to give you a hint of what some of those photos are like, again, here's some sampling. These are not all of them, but they are some of the photos that you can choose from. The observer's calendar, the 2022 is now out and up for purchase from RASC. We have them here. You can purchase them for $25 each. And again, by sending the funds to the treasurer or by mailing a check to us, you too can get your copy. And what's really intriguing is that there are 2 of our members that are featured in it. Mike Gatto has his 15 pencil sketch of Mars as it went through its series of changes. And as well in September, Fiona Morris is featured again with her Rails to the Sky, which is an incredible photograph. So please purchase your RASC calendar, and you can get it from us. RASC News, NOVA, the New Observers to Visual Astronomy program, which hasn't been offered here in our center since about 2015 or so, has been revised through Hamilton Center's Edward Mitzi and Mark Smith, along with National Office staff Jenna Hines and Samantha Jewett. It's been revised to be a 6 to 8 week course. There are half-hour modules, 12 of them are core, and there are 9 optionals. It is set up so that you can bring this course to your membership either virtually or through in-person, depending upon how COVID allows you to do this. And it's meant for folks ages 12 and up. The official launch of this hasn't been made, but you can certainly get more information at that website. And now, speaking of Jenna and Samantha, for those of us that knew Jenna, we have to say a fond farewell. Jenna has been an incredible staff member over the 6 years that she's been with us. In fact, we had the extreme pleasure of having her here at one of our meetings when she first came on staff, when she was the youth coordinator at the time. Thankfully, Samantha Jewett, who has been working with Samantha over the past year, or working with Jenna rather, is taking over the role. So there won't be a loss of information, and Jenna's not too far away that I'm sure Samantha can access her. But in either case, you can still reach Samantha at the same email, which is outreach@rasc.ca. The Observer's Handbook. Apparently there were 24 members in Nova Scotia who did not receive their handbook prior to the new year. I offer our apologies. The problem lay with the distributor who was struck by COVID, and when this replacement staff came in, they didn't know what to do with it, and so it was postponed. But we have the promise from National and from the distributor that if you haven't received it this past week, you will early this coming one. Thing to note about the 2022 Observer's Handbook is that we have 10 folk from our membership who have contributed to that edition, and many of them are longtime contributors. Also to note from the National Office, there'll be a focus on top 10 night sky events of 2022, and Reem Khalifa will post those short videos on RASC social media, and I'm sure you'll be apprised of those through the newsletter and the bulletin as to when and where those will be available. Heads up regarding our upcoming meeting dates. February, we have Keegan Oikel, who is one of our youth members. He's on the youth committee, and he will address what is the youth committee, what's all involved, and some of the special projects that they will be or have been doing and will be doing. And our keynote is Dr. Jennifer West, and she's going to be addressing the magnetic tunnel project. And you can get a sneak peek at what her topic is about with the January-February Sky News, because there's an article about magnetic tunnel project by Jennifer in it. In March, we have David Schumann, and he will be addressing some NASA missions, along with another edition of Chris Young's Astronomy Lore. The other dates are cited here. Keep in mind, all our meeting dates are posted on our website. So if you haven't marked your calendars, please do so. And you're welcome to join us on Zoom. And as I mentioned earlier, that should our formats change, we will certainly keep people apprised as to how that changes. So if you haven't joined RASC, now would be a good time to do so. You can find how to join us in our website, Center's website, and About Us. On the national website, it's just below the masthead in the words Join Us, or Join Now, rather. So to become a member, if you want to join online, you just have to click on Becoming a Member and click on Join. It'll take you right to the form you fill out. Be sure to affiliate with us at Halifax Center. Or if you're old school and prefer to fill in a form and mail it in along with your payment, you can click on the second part, which says Form, and do so. We recognize that COVID has presented some challenges for some of our members with respect to finances. If you do need assistance, please contact mempub@rasc.ca and explain what the circumstances are, and I'm sure they will be able to assist you. We do know that a couple of our members have already utilize this to great success, so please don't hesitate. For our center, there, the perks. You get our email discussion list, plus the access to the St. Croix Observatory, and the links are there. So, any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I wanted to thank Chris Young for his presentation. He did a lot of digging and a lot of interesting stuff, and Chris, in all the times I've looked into Skylore, I have never seen the Golden Gate reference ever. So that was really interesting. I wonder if that will show up somewhere else sometime.
Well, thanks, Mary Lou. The water was deep for the Pleiades. I had no idea.
Yeah.
It fell off when it got deep real fast. So
yeah, I can just imagine. But you pulled up a lot of interesting tidbits there. Some of it I had not seen before. So that was a very interesting presentation. Thank you for all your hard work.
You're most welcome. I'll probably do a little follow up on some of the stuff that was in there that I didn't get a chance, because as I said, a lot of information. So, but anyway, thank you.
Yeah, and Jerry just posted the fact that the James Webb Telescope mirror was fully extended and locked into place at 2:17 p.m. this afternoon. So it's going well. On that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. I hope you've learned a little bit, been entertained a little bit, and will join us again next month when we come back for another edition of the RASC Halifax Center members meeting.